Hello, everyone. Can you hear me? Wow, my picture is really bad here. Let me try to change my settings. Hang on 1 minute here. That's a little better. How's everybody doing today? Looks like we got about 6 folks here so far. You guys can go ahead and unmute yourself and chime in and say hi.
Hi everyone, this is Maddie Carter. Sorry I missed last week. I was so sick. You can still hear the cold in my voice, but I was sick.
Good morning, Maddie. Let's give everybody a few more minutes here as you come on, if you don't mind signing in the chat so we know who's here. See Harold and Vicky have done so already. Pull up my presentation here. How were the last few sessions, guys?
They were great. I learned so much. So I really appreciated those last 2 sessions and helping me understand, especially the takeoff portion, the sum bid sheets. Like that was, that was an opening.
Kevin really knows his stuff. I've
Oh yeah,
done
it
a
was
lot.
super informative.
Yeah, I've done a lot of estimating and takeoff over the years, and I've learned new stuff from him just watching him on some of these presentations.
Yeah, I learned a lot as well.
Good stuff. All right, well, it's a few minutes after 8 here. We'll go ahead and get started. I don't think we have quite everybody, but I know on Saturdays it's a little tough to gather everybody in one spot. So it's been a few weeks since we last connected. I remember most of these names. I won't lie, I don't remember exactly everything everybody does. So I may go a little bit back to introductions here. I don't see anybody new who doesn't know me from the last one, but I'm Zach again still. And today we're talking about project scheduling and planning. We got 3 hours booked, so I think we'll probably do a couple of breaks in there. I know we will do a few breaks in there. We'll just fit them in as the flow goes. And before I really get my presentation going, just want to check in. The group's small enough, starting with Vicky. Why don't you talk to me a little bit about what your planning and scheduling not needs are, but how it interacts with your company and kind of what you're hoping to gain out of this. There's 2 focuses that we'll talk about. One is schedules for owners on a project, and one is how to manage your resources. So before I dive in, I'd like to see which one I should focus on more here.
Well, good morning. So scheduling within my company, mostly there's not that much of a big issue since we are kind of we're either well, it kind of depends the type of project. If it's a new build or whether it's already an existing building. So we focus on physical security, so cameras, access, card access, and all that such. So usually we have no issues. We're usually the last ones there, basically,
Right.
after everything's done, or we're usually never in anyone's way, so scheduling isn't mostly an issue. It's only an issue when we're participating with a subcontractor that we hired as an electrician. Then we do have to wait for them to finish all electrical work before we go in and program everything.
How about, do owners ask you to submit schedule information at the beginning of a
Uh,
project?
Majority of the time, they don't tell us to submit a schedule. They mostly tell us to submit like they want something, a final completion problem, specifically. They want
Okay.
us to give them when they think they'll be done.
Cool. Harold, how about you?
Hello. In terms of scheduling, I don't really have a lot of issues with scheduling. So, just like someone said earlier last week, just doing the sum sheets, that's really helped me. And in terms of like breaking everything down hourly and putting materials into my spreadsheets. But we're really kitchen and baths. Well, I guess the scheduling would come in when we have multiple projects, and it's just working with subcontractors and really trying to stick to the project plan, because a lot of those guys are independent contractors, and really trying to make it where it's as seamless of a flow as possible for the homeowner going in between trades.
Right. Do you build schedules for the homeowner, or do you participate in those as a sub?
I build them for the homeowners.
Okay, so you're putting together something you can show them, saying here's how your remodel is going to go, or your new construction is going to go.
Yeah, and because we focus just really kitchen and bath, it's on a smaller level. So I don't use a Gantt chart. I use what we call a T-minus chart.
Okay.
So it's a 7-day breakdown in the jobs, and it's just kind of what's going on, and then we'll have like a heat chart to say if we're on track, if we're ahead, or if we're behind. If we're behind, we have to have a reason for it.
Okay, cool. Kathy?
I don't typically have a I guess a systematic way of approaching it. I come from more of a like healthcare corporate background, and so when I started this company, my husband, I leaned a lot on his expertise in construction, being in for 20 years, and so I that's why I'm dedicated to learning as much as I can, just so I can properly manage things, because I think there's a lot of corporate practices and systems that could come over to the construction side that could really help things move, or at least be communicated more effectively, especially with working with other subs on a job, and just making sure that we can follow a schedule instead of just giving that old, that
Right.
2-week timeline that everyone's famous for.
Okay, Edward?
Yes, hello everybody. I mean, well, where scheduling comes in with us is, for the most part, we have a specified time to do what we do. We install, we do structural iron work. So there's always a time frame to where we're not holding up the next phase of the project. We have to have our things done, so things need to be scheduled accordingly. I have to have enough guys to do the job that we need to do. Delay wise, sometimes we have weather delays or waiting for equipment, things like that. There's things like change orders. They make changes, so that delays things sometimes as well.
Okay. Maddie?
Schedule.
Oh, sorry, Ed. You got more?
No, I was just saying
We got
scheduling is
time. So,
Okay, so now last thing I was saying is that scheduling is very important with what we do. You don't want to hold up a project. You can definitely begin to have problems.
Maddie, how about you? What are you after? Where can I help you on the scheduling aspect here?
Say the question again.
Just kind of give me some info on what information or what guidance or knowledge would be helpful for you on the scheduling and planning, that so I can kind of focus on those areas.
Well, I am a project manager by nature, and my business is project manager urban planning. So scheduling is what we build everything around, making sure we schedule, make sure we understand the scope of work, all of that. So scheduling, I'm always open to new information. And I'll just be listening out for some key point I don't understand or what haven't
Mhm.
heard. So I could just say that,
Okay. Cool. Mo, how are you doing today?
I'm doing well. Thanks for asking. How are you?
Doing pretty good.
So, depending on the type of project that we do, um, kitchen and bath is what we see a lot of, but I also get into more complex projects such as doing remodeling of like multi-unit buildings, light commercial, things like that. So it would depend on who I'm working with. So if I'm doing just like a kitchen and bath, I have teams that are dedicated solely to that. Um, I create a work breakdown structure, I use that, and essentially I give the client a range of when I expect to be done. For the most part, I keep them updated on what's going on, and I focus more on providing good communication as opposed to a defined timeline. And the reason for that is because as a GC, I only have so much control over subcontractors, which would be something, if you have any insight on how we can get subcontractors to actually, meet timelines, I think it would help even out the playing field against companies who hire internally. Um, and then for larger projects where I am operating more as a general contractor and I'm hiring out all the individual trades, I use work breakdown structure. I put it into my software, and I'm solely responsible for scheduling. So I guess in terms of that, anything that I could use help on is probably more, again, the fundamentals and the nuances of it. Like I don't have formal training in
Right.
terms of project management, so I've kind of just learned this on the go.
Mhm.
So
Okay. Ty? You're on mute, Ty, if you're maybe you stepped away. Oh, there you go.
What about now?
I can hear you. Yep, go for it.
Good, thanks. Um, well, I'm here. I'm open. I'm open to new ideas, new ways of doing things. So, we do, we do have scheduling issues sometimes. So that's the whole reason why I'm here, just to get a bit more insight on new ways of structuring and scheduling projects.
Yeah. What kind of challenges do you run into?
Well, when you have multiple projects, sometimes the workforce is not there, and you tend to come across situations where things are not working out. So I just want to get a deeper insight on best way to schedule these type of situations.
So in that example, is it your own workforce that's not available because you're
Yes.
tied up in other projects?
Yep,
Okay.
exactly.
Juan, good morning.
Good morning. This is Juan Calajorano. I'm a little bit different, I guess, too, from everybody else. I do business development consulting, so I work with companies, providing providing a business development opportunities and connecting people and so on. But I've been around the industry for the last 15 years. But I will say whatever the team decides, whatever you at the end of the day think is the best way. But I've done some project management courses and stuff like that, so I do understand a little bit of that. But I'm always open to learn more. Obviously, because part of what I do is also ensure that if I'm helping somebody get a contract, I understand everything's got to go into it and help them out with their will be this case will be the planning the schedule, make sure the delivery is what it should be, where it should be, and so on. So, yeah.
Okay. And then we got Michael.
Good morning, everyone.
Morning.
It depends with me. It depends on the size of the scope, the size of the work, or the scope of the work, to what level that the scope is detailed with. We've been using Project Manager. We've also used, at the end of the day, I use Visio on top of this Project Manager software just to make sure that I keep track of all the issues, because back when the COVID time, we were having real issues with material, labor,
Okay.
but mainly material, because the material in some aspects of things that we need were not available. Supply chain wasn't there. So, that was the biggest issues that we've had in doing some of the projects that we worked on. But I like to kind of micromanage the projects a little bit more, because there's more at stake for me. So, the project manager tool that we have, it's been a big one, but I also use Visio at times just to keep track of everything.
You say Visio?
Yes,
So the flowchart software?
yes.
Okay, that's interesting. How do you use that? That's kind of a new one for me. I'd like to
Well,
learn.
I set the project up in phases, and in each one of the flow chart spots, I add categories, I add tasks, and I add each individual level. It's kind of one of those extra nuanced things that I do, because initially I'm a cost analyst coming this is coming from a cost analyst.
Okay.
So I manage things a little bit more to the minute point, to make sure that everything is followed through, and that the material is delivered on time, and that we've covered the cost. Because I had some smaller contractors that on some of the projects had delivered or weren't able to deliver back with the supply issues. And it gives me a better handle on trying to keep on top of those things. But the flowchart software I prefer it, because it's more of a smaller version of the project, so I can keep a better eye on it on a day-to-day basis, because I don't go into the detail that project manager software make you go into. So I just, it's kind of one of those things on the fly.
Okay. I'm gonna do. I was gonna set up a quick poll here, but maybe with this size crowd, it's easier to ask. So use raise your hand in the little raise your hand button if you have been on a project where you've been asked to participate in the critical path schedule or a CPM schedule, either developing it or providing information for it. Anybody? Or am I not seeing? Sorry, my screen's a little different because I'm not used to hosting on Zoom here. So I'm not seeing. So that's kind of interesting. That in general, nobody's been asked to provide information on a CPM format. that's an area where I was going to cover. And I think if, kind of the intent of this program is to help grow into some more of the larger projects, is there, and go ahead and just speak up. We don't need to do the raise hand thing. Is there interest in focusing on critical path schedules and what owners may ask to use and to see?
I think it's very important to really learn about critical path,
Yeah.
because I think if you've ever taken up PMP, that's one of the most difficult portion of the PMP assignment is understanding the critical path, the method of finding resolution to the project.
Yeah.
I will agree with that. The critical path would be good to focus on, because that's going to determine whether the project maybe is going to finish on time or not, or have issues with delivery when you have to.
Okay. Yeah, I think I was going to dive into that for a little bit at the start here, and we'll kind of see how it goes with questions and thoughts. Is there anybody who doesn't know or hasn't heard critical path method or critical path schedule?
And I was going to say something else.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're a person that understand a back and forth, because critical path is more go forward, come back so many times, then it's a back and forth, and it's actually interesting. It's not as hard as, so today, once you get to describing it, it's not as hard as you think once you calm down, even transition, because it's going forward and then turn around and going backwards. You know what I mean? So it's pretty cool to watch. I'm very prepared for this one. It's pretty cool.
Yeah, I never heard of it.
Okay.
Haven't yet had to deal with it.
Some may consider yourself lucky if that's the case. It's one of those things that some people love it, some people don't love it, but a lot of it is in your first project where an owner says, give me a CPM schedule, and you're asking yourself what, and then you go to Google what that is. It gets pretty intimidating when you look at it from that standpoint. So I think what I want to do is kind of just give what I consider a simple view of it, and we can dive into more technical aspects if desired and needed. Images out of the way here. So basic scheduling principles. I think everybody here, just from what we've talked about, they understand why a schedule really matters to them, right? It's really comes down to being there, knowing what needs to be done, how long it's going to take, what the resources are, and how it interfaces with the rest of the project and other contractors and stuff. So typically you see two different scheduling needs. There's the project schedule for all of your individual projects, and there's the resource planning schedule. So the project schedule, usually that's for the owner or requested by the owner or managed by the owner. So in residential, right, it can be the homeowner saying, hey, can you guys give me a schedule for my kitchen remodel? So Harold, you talked about that. So when are you guys going to start? How long am I going to be not able to use in my kitchen? What subs are going to be there? When do I need my appliances delivered? When need to be ready for that, stuff like that. So that's the project schedule, right? On commercial construction, where you're doing steel erection, same thing. The owner has an overall schedule that you've got to slide into right there. Typically, the owner on a larger project is going to have some request, some form of CPM, but when you're a sub on there, you really may have minimal involvement. They just are going to ask you how long are you going to take and when are you going to be here and what's got to be done before you can show up. But it allows the owner to track progress. It allows them to track both when they're going to have bills coming in to pay subs, as well as when they can get the project done, get a certificate of occupancy, change their construction loan into whatever other financing they have. So the project schedule is quite an important tool for them. And it also is a tool they use to minimize or track or fight disputes on timing. So they show planned work and completed work. They can be resource or cost loaded. And what that means is it can say this week, steel erection is going to have 9 guys and a crane. And from what I'm going to pay that contractor, it's going to cost me $10,000. So it shows them cash flow. It shows them how many people are going to be on site. So they can really get into substantial detail, particularly on the more complex projects, more critical projects, stuff like airport construction or utility installation, stuff like that. Owners a lot of times have either a scheduling staff on their team, or they will hire a project manager. One that may be an area that you see sometimes where they're looking for help, or a consultant on having a scheduler that understands the software, understands all the ins and outs of how to build complex schedules. And so there's a little bit of expense for them as well right there that they have to consider when they're planning on how to manage their schedules. For the contractor project schedule, that's, and I think most of you kind of touched on this, your interface is really, okay, when am I supposed to be there? And that can happen. The information on that can come in 2 forms. One is, you tell them, here's what I need. So for steel erection, you need a foundation, you need anchor bolts. What else you need on that? That's Harold, right? I'm sorry, Edward. What else do you need to know when you can show up?
To know when I can show up on the job.
Yeah. So if an owner's asking you to participate in the schedule, what information do you need to know to tell them what has to be done, and how can you make sure the job's ready for you?
For the most part, we generally work, because we're subcontractors, so we work with
Right.
a project manager, and we have to, whatever's being installed, we have to make sure it's on the site. I have to make sure I have guys who, guys ready to work. We need, to take one of my trucks there. Just basically, well, this will be after I do like a walkthrough to just
Mhm.
check everything to make sure that I take note of what we need. And it's basically just working with the project manager as far as what day to start, because if the iron is not there, we can't install it. Or if whatever we're doing that day is not on site, we can't begin. Like, I have to have rental equipment sometimes. So all of that stuff has to come together before we even start. So generally it's just checking on that stuff. Once everything is in place, then we can just start the job.
About stuff like, do you ever need a crane sitting in the road? You got to get a permit to shut down a
Definitely.
lane. So
Absolutely.
yeah.
Yep. Definitely.
So the project schedule is all those details.
Mhm.
And as subs, what really matters to you is, like you said, is everything there for you to show up. But as these schedules are being built, what matters to the owner is there's 50 of those subs, right? So how do you, okay, we're going to close the lane on this day to do the steel erection, and we also bring in do a concrete pour and fit in that lane closure. So that's really what the project schedule is all about.
Mhm.
And some subs or some contractors will also build their own project schedule instead of trying to just use the overall owner one, because they need a little more detail specific to, all right, what am I doing on day 1? Am I setting columns for the first floor, and day 2 I'm setting joists for second floor? And you got to build kind of your own day by day one. So what else on project schedules? And this is where you usually will see software and hear the words Gantt chart. CPM is critical path method. PERT is a view of a schedule that is used for critical path. TIA is a time impact analysis for delay resolution. We'll talk about that a little bit. So overall, that's how I describe the project schedule. The resource planning schedule, this is where you are figuring out, you talked about, you got to make sure the guys are available, that the equipment's available, that if you have 12 jobs going on, how are you going to staff all of them? So this is looking at your every single day activities, right? Your operations for your company. And so from what I've heard here, some of you folks may be responsible for the scheduling in your work. Some may have, more of the operations person or field manager who handles it. But it all comes down to the people, the materials, the equipment and tools, as well as the money, right? Who considers payroll when they're looking at their schedule for the next month on making sure you get paid. You got enough cash coming in to cover payroll. Anybody ever look at that when they're building their plans? Does anybody ever think of it in the back of their head as they're doing it? Mo, I see you chimed in yet. How
I think I mean we just have to, right? I mean, cash flow is critical. We're not going to get paid. I mean, if we get paid in 7 days, that's great. But a lot of time it's going to take. If you do government tax, it's going to take about 90, 120 days.
Yeah.
But what I was going to say too is that you got to kind of have maybe multiple plans and schedules, right? Because you want for the particular project you're working on. But also, if you're working multiple projects, you got your people and make sure you got to allocate them, not double book them and stuff like that. So having something visual that you can look at and move pieces around, that makes it a lot easier. At least one point. And then you deal with everything else.
Yeah. So Mo, you said, you consider the financial aspect of it. How does it affect your resource planning? What questions do you ask yourself when you're building your schedule for whatever term you do the next week or month or 6 months?
So basically a lot of it comes down to the wording of the contract. And I guess the way that we do our draw schedule needs to match up with how I pay out my contractors. And the way I've always been taught is to try, don't use your own money. When you're taking your deposits, you want to schedule them so you're managing a client's budget and you're paying the contractors on a timely basis without overcommitting to either side. So sometimes like you'll have your electrical inspection, your plumbing inspection, your HVAC inspection. You have to pay all three trades. And in the wording of the contract, you said, all the way up until tiling. So you're paying a lot of trades and then you go over it. And if you're doing that on multiple job sites, you start to get into a critical situation. So it's either, taking lower risk or being able to manage budgets at higher levels, which is kind of what I'm hoping to get out of coming to these classes too, honestly.
Okay, so the kind of the financial forecasting is something that, right. And I think that we will get into that in a little more detail and some of the future stuff here, but I will definitely try and keep that in mind for the next year. Resource planning schedules, how far ahead you look really kind of depends on your work volume, the way you structure your company. And some people just prefer to manage for the next week or two, or they're so busy they're only capable, there's only so much time in a day, so you can only look the next week or two. Some really try and get the longer term window planned out, and that really on the financial side is really way I recommend trying to focus as you build some robust planning and scheduling tools. It is looking at the longer 30-day or 90-day workflow, not on a super detailed level, but enough for you to understand, I'm $20,000 crane bill coming up in 3 months, right? Stuff like that, or this project's going to wrap up in 1 month. We're going to get paid out. We're going to get our retention. So you can kind of look at your cash flow associated with that as well. And your resource planning schedules. These are your daily schedules. They can change every hour. Right? How many times have you showed up on a job and that lane closure for your crane didn't happen or was 2 hours late? Probably one of the I find most important things to remember and understand about scheduling is they're a plan, but plans are meant to be changed. They do change, and half of being a contractor, or maybe even more, is being able to respond to that. Base gets in the way of my screen share here. So project schedules, why do they matter for subs? Whether you're a first year sub or 2 or 3 levels down. I don't know. Vicky, you said for the security stuff, are you hired by the owner? Or are you hired by electrical subs or by the GC? Or how many contracts are between you and the owner?
So it kind of depends on the situation or who our client is. Sometimes we're just hired directly from an owner and saying oh hey, we need this many more card access or this many more cameras to increase security and such. So when that situation happens, we just tell them, oh, we might take so and so days. Or sometimes we're hired within an even bigger project, and then it honestly varies between, but it's majority of work is it's an independent project, and we're just hired directly from the owners.
Okay. Does anybody else have work that they may be, so there's the owner, then there's the GC, and then maybe there's multiple GCs, and there are a couple layers in the contract below that. Are you guys usually like first tier or second tier? Does that I should ask, does that question make sense from a terminology aspect?
You say, are we first year or second tier?
Sorry, so first tier level. So are you a sub to a GC, or are you a sub to a sub to a sub to a sub?
Yeah, sometimes we're sub to a sub.
Yeah.
Really, mostly. I'm only a little over a year old. So most of my work comes from fabricators who actually make what we install. So I really sub under them for the most part.
Yeah. The reason I asked that question, and if you're relatively new to that, to doing the work in that format, you may not run across this, and usually comes up when there's a problem on the job. But if you are a sub to a sub, or even farther down, you may sign a contract that says you're accepting everything that the GC's terms say with the owner. And a lot of times that is, here's the schedule that's required, here's the information that's required for it, and most importantly out of that, here's how a delay will be resolved using this information. And what I want to kind of highlight there, and I'd be open, I think this is a good area for questions if you guys have them, or if I'm saying something that's doesn't quite make sense, please definitely jump in here. That's important because if everything goes great, there's never a problem. But if you run into something where somebody's saying you are behind schedule, but you're not, your work is on schedule, but somebody ahead of you was behind schedule, or the owner had an issue that slowed you down, but you haven't really done any documentation on basically a planned baseline schedule versus what has actually happened, you don't have any information to fight that battle, right? But your contract may say that you are supposed to have that information to fight the battle. Does anybody run into those scenarios where I don't want to say it in a way that makes anybody feel like they're not doing their job, but they sign a contract maybe without understanding those details or knowing how schedules can affect their responsibility and ability to get paid? Any examples of problems?
Not for me, thankfully.
That's good. hopefully this can help head that off. Anybody else? Ever had any delay, what's often called a delay claim or a time dispute? Somebody where an owner says, I'm not paying you because you're not done yet, and you're supposed to be done. If it's no across the board, I'd say everybody's doing a good job, but also fortunate because these things come up no matter how good a job that you do. So my point with that is, as you grow and try and go for larger projects and stuff, you're going to run into scenarios where the schedule terms and requirements do get passed down onto you. Mo, you're asking for examples of how that would work. You're asking for examples of how the terms would be passed down to you, or how the delay would become your problem.
In terms of like the time disputes and how that would, how you could be affected by that, like how you would be held accountable to that in terms of a critical path method.
Right. Yep. Yeah. So we'll get into that here, and
Okay.
I'll try and do some kind of simple examples that show how you may not think that you can be responsible, and maybe you aren't, but you get tied up into it. So but the project schedule does affect the smaller tier subs. They just may never know it until they run into one of these problems, because you may not even be asked how long are you going to take, because the sub that's hiring you may realize, they only have 1 day to put security cameras in, so they're not even going to ask because they just know, and they know they're going to schedule you, they're going to fit you in. If something slips up, that camera doesn't get put in, so they can't pass final inspection, then here's kind of an example. Well, using a very small activity that seems like it may not be a big deal on the larger project, but say the camera's not done, I can't pass final inspection, so I couldn't bring my client in, and they had a $20,000 furniture move set up. So now everybody starts pointing fingers, and comes back to, well, the security camera wasn't done, right? So it's Vicky's fault in that example. Vicky, I'm not picking on you, just throwing out a scenario. But
Yeah, no problem.
Right? It doesn't seem like it seems like it may never happen. Like it's a small thing. You're saying, well, I was just happened to be 1 day off of what I thought I was because I got tied up on another project. But when you get into when the lawyers get involved and they say, well, Vicky's company signed a contract saying they're responsible for meeting the project schedule, but you never saw the project schedule because it seemed like it didn't necessarily, that you didn't need, the prime didn't need to take the time to sit down with you for a 1 day's worth of work scenario. You're in a dispute where the paper says you should have known, and the reality is it's probably not that much your fault, because there could have been 4 delays ahead of you that made that one camera 1 day late. But in the end, you're taking your time, potentially your money, and there's some risk there, financial risk, that you may say, well, fine, I'll contribute $1,000 to the $20,000 move that got delayed, because you're trying to maintain good business relationships. You don't have paperwork showing that you were on time, but somebody ahead of you was delayed. That's an example of where a small contract, small scope of work can still be tied up into the larger scheme of things, and the contract says it, and it's been passed down. But by not understanding that, or not realizing that's within the contract, you can put yourself at risk. And what I've got next here is, so even when the prime contract doesn't pass those terms on, you're still obligated and affected by the schedule, because it affects your resources, your work, your cash flow, your timing, where your job interacts with, where that project interacts with your overall schedule for all your resources. It sometimes scheduling information on larger projects, they require monthly updates. The owner requires it, and they won't pay the GC until they accept that monthly update. So you can be way down the chain, not even know there's a problem. The GC could be in a big battle with the owner. The owner saying, "I'm not paying you this month until you fix this schedule and reflect what's accurate," and you're there waiting for your check. And it's the unfortunate contract model that we often have these days. There, that the smaller subs or smaller scope kind of get squashed down within those. And so you do need to be aware of what the prime contract says on these larger projects, so you can try and head off some of those issues. And you can say, in your subcontract with the GC, you can have terminology in there that says, "You owe me my money when my work is accepted, regardless of any disputes that you have with the owner." That's why you do want to try and be as aware as aware as you can of the schedule requirements for the prime contract. So there's risk there, right? I just covered some scenarios where the project schedule can be a tool that seems intimidating, can seem to be place risk on you. But it can also be a tool that does protect you, and using it and participating in it will help you establish your rights around any kind of delay issues. It can establish your rights around payment. It can help you participate in the project in a way that the project owner sees, wow, our steel erection guy really helped out by coming in to sit in that scheduling meeting and said, well, if you guys do this, I can save 2 weeks on the project. The owner sees that, the GC sees that, and now you're improving your relationship building. You can't do that stuff if you aren't involved or aware of the project schedule. And I recommend that you start your interaction with what the project schedule is when you bid the job. And so if you're bidding it as the GC, you're building the schedule when you do your bid. And I think Kevin probably covered some of this. You're talking about durations, right? And production. If you're building some schedule information as you bid the job, that's how you know how much it's going to cost, right? You got this many labor hours over this much time. So you have your baseline information right there. I recommend you kind of take that to the next step when you bid the job, and you do a basic schedule, right? A schedule that shows how many critical resources you need that are critical to your company. So if you've only got 2 certified welders or 1 tech that's certified to install a certain kind of security camera, those are your critical resources. When you're bidding new work, you want to make sure that they fit into your overall plan. So building a basic project schedule for your work as you bid it can be a very helpful tool, and can be a relatively low effort to do the basic one. Does anybody build schedules when they bid work instead of waiting till after they bid it?
No, not me.
Anybody else? Ty? Have any input? No worries if you don't. Just
No.
yeah. Okay. Bear with me while I make sure I'm not missing anything that I wanted to cover right here. Sometimes these schedules will be asked for when you bid the job. And as a sub, usually what you're going to be asked for is the prime's going to say, I need your durations and for your scope of work. And that can appear to be a very simple answer. You can say, I have 2 weeks worth of work. But if you're giving information to a prime to build a schedule, because often those are being built to submit with the bid, if you don't understand what they're going to do with that information, there's some risk there. Because they can say, well, they only take 2 weeks and they plug you in, 1 week at the beginning of the job and 1 week at the end. And then they didn't realize you meant you need 2 weeks straight. And, all these certain activities have to be done before you can show up. A prime and a GC may not understand your work, may not understand the details of it. So when you're asked for that information, you do want to understand why they're asking for it. And that means, what do they want to know? How's it information going to be used? And on larger projects, you may say, can I sit down with you for a few minutes and work on this with you? You also want to, if you're providing schedule information during a bid, you want to try and get your subcontract or your contract with whoever you're working for to reference that information. Because that information can then be used later. You can, when there's a dispute on time or a delay, you've got a contract that says, I told you I need 2 weeks, and these are the requirements that need to be done before I show up. And now you've got something on paper that's in a contract that makes for a very easy resolution to that case. Once you get through the bid, let me take a look here, see where we're headed. Okay. When a project's kicking off, you may, so who has been asked to look at a baseline schedule, or who's heard the term baseline schedule? Maddie, I'm sure you have, with considering you've gone through the PMP stuff. You want to kind of describe what you understand it to be?
I'm sorry, my house is a little loud. Okay.
You there?
Yeah, I'm here. Yes.
Okay.
Okay. Let me
Yeah.
let me go into place. As you hear the background, I'm sorry.
Yeah. I just saw, I know you had talked about going through the PMP and stuff. So I know you've been familiar with the term on baseline schedule. I thought I'd see what your understanding of what the baseline schedule is and how it's used in a project.
But I have to find some slow salt and fighting. Okay. Okay, it's understanding, like I said from the beginning, it's really understanding the budget, understanding each milestones, the scope of work, and being able to keep that into a specific timeline. So that way you can prevent those that what you spoke about when someone come to you and say, hey, I'm not going to pay you until you on time. Well, you got to be able to understand those milestones before it gets to that point. You got to know what's stalling the project when it's become stalling. I could just say like, say if say I'm doing antennas for telecom, right? I'm doing a project manager for them. I got to be able to speak one of our project managers, not to know specifically detail of the scope of work when dealing with the stakeholder and the documents needed and the budget set within the, make sure everything is correct in the drawings. And if it gets to a point where there is things that are missing, or the CDs that come, the final CDs that come back and it doesn't match the scope of work, you have to be able to know when to push back. So that way that will stop the time. That will stop the clock. So it won't fall on you. You have to make sure you push it back on them. So
yeah,
it's understanding your budget, understanding, the timeline, understanding all of that. So that plays a major role in that.
Yeah. So the baseline schedule is kind of, when you compare it to a financial term, it's the time budget for the project. And subs are often asked, again, just to provide very basic information like what's your duration. Sometimes they ask for the resource loading and the cost aspect. And so you just shoot them an email saying, well, I need 2 weeks. Whoever's building the schedule takes that, they put in your 2 weeks. That schedule gets submitted to the owner. The owner says, yeah, this baseline schedule looks great. We're going to put a timestamp on it. And now this is how everybody's progress is tracked. So you start doing the work. Your scope shows up. You show up on site on day one. Everything's great for the first week. And then, maybe the owner is furnishing material. And maybe the owner is responsible for scheduling inspections. There's a variety of things where other people are involved in your work and they miss that. So you said you're going to take 2 weeks. You have a baseline schedule for the project that said it's going to take 2 weeks. Now you're waiting on this one delay and you're sitting there for 3 weeks and you've got equipment on site on standby that you're paying rent for. You're tying up crews that could be on other jobs. It's not your fault. What do you do, right? And that's where the baseline schedule and your participation in it becomes a tool to protect you, because you've done the front end work on your end to establish your 2 weeks. And as these delays have happened, hopefully you're using that information to shoot an email or letter or phone call, text, some form of communication that can be tracked to the owner saying, hey, you guys, if you don't schedule this inspection for tomorrow, I'm at a standstill and I'm not going to pay for my equipment rental. I'm sitting there. Do you want me to take the equipment off site, or do you want me to sit here and you pay the bills until you get that inspection taken care of? If you don't participate in this front end work with the owners and the GCs on that, you don't have the ability to do that because you have no backup information establishing how you plan the work. You have nothing saying they agree to it because it's within a baseline schedule. So when you get into larger projects, these schedules may seem intimidating, but they're really actually a tool that can be used to help you and to show that you are a team member on the project, that you matter on the project, that you understand that, and that you have the knowledge and capability to actually participate in these actions. All that stuff goes to business development a little bit, because the contractors that don't say, well, why do you need a schedule? As opposed to saying, here's my schedule. Can we sit down and see where we fit? And I'd like to see the baseline so I understand what I'm up against. The contractor who does that participation is going to go to the top of the call list for the next project. So all that I just went through is really project schedules for the owner. There's also project schedules for yourself. And a lot of people say, what do I need? Do I need a schedule for every project? Do I need a schedule that shows all my projects together? And I always defer to yes. What that looks like varies based on how big your projects are, your volume of work, how tactical your work can be. There's a variety of drivers that go into how you manage those schedules. But I do recommend, particularly for subs who are interacting with a lot of GCs or a lot of projects at once, that require front end work like permit information, shop drawings for submittals or product data, stuff that you have to have in place that you're responsible for before you can show up. I do really recommend having some form of scheduler tracking system. And Michael, you talked about using Visio. Maybe this is the kind of stuff you're using it for, but you need to have project schedules that give you reminders to turn in this submittal so you can make sure you can start in 3 weeks, or to go pick up the permit from the building department to make sure that your crew's ready to start on Monday. Yeah, so those are the kind of things that I see as drivers on how, does a contractor need to have project schedules? Those schedules can be on a whiteboard for some, they can be in Excel for others, they can be in Procore, Builder Trend, Microsoft Project. There's hundreds or more of tools out there, but I do really push to have something. And it does seem, from our initial questions right there, it does seem like most of the folks here have some form of scheduling aspect. So I think we're in good shape there. But are there questions kind of, does anybody feel they lack in that department, that they're missing something, or in their overall managing their operations with across all their projects?
As we grow, I'm definitely gonna have to look more into more of a formal schedule for everything. Right now, we're pretty small and we're growing, honestly, pretty quick right now. So that's one thing, that's one goal that I have
Okay.
in the near future.
So are you considering like what kind of software to use, or just
Yeah, software
what kind of
and just
questions do you need answers to kind of make that move? And I asked that from a discussion because I think I would guess that some of the folks here have gone through this and maybe selected some stuff that's been useful to them. So
SharePoint is really good.
SharePoint.
SharePoint is an excellent source of kind of like keeping track of sites, keeping track of things you're doing, holding documents, where you can everybody be on the same system with it. SharePoint is really popular.
Anybody else?
I've actually heard of SharePoint. I need to look into that.
I like
Yeah,
contractor foreman.
Contractor foreman.
Yeah.
How give us a little overview of how you use it and how it functions for you.
I would say that it's like an all-in-one software, from tracking like the first time somebody fills out a form on your website until they accept, until you can make an estimate, until they accept it. It becomes a project. You can track it through the entire life cycle of the project, and then even keep it as an account, do continuing service after that. It has scheduling. It has, I'm trying to think.
Does it have scheduling that allows you to see all your projects together?
Yeah, I'm trying to see if I can maybe share something.
What
Yeah,
was
you're
the
welcome
name
to-
of it again?
Contractor foreman.
Okay.
Yeah, you're welcome to share your screen if you would like. Obviously, if you have any information, it's top secret sauce. We're okay if you don't share that.
No, I'm trying to think if I can.
And we've got time. We can come back to that as well if you want.
Yeah.
I do get into not specific software, but software stuff later.
Mhm.
Who uses a whiteboard? The silence I like, because it's my least favorite tool, but I know that it's functional for some people.
Can you describe it? Because working in a lot of different companies that I worked for, a lot of the apps we were working on, we were just trained to work on, and we didn't know what the name of the apps were. So after a while, they all look alike. I'll be honest with you.
Well, what's your question there?
Can you give us like it's called whiteboard, you say?
No, like a whiteboard on a wall.
Oh, that's
Yeah.
what I was gonna say. Like, I thought you were talking about an app called a whiteboard. I was like, describe
No.
it, because we worked on some and
It-
you didn't know the name of it. Oh, a whiteboard. That's hilarious.
It's often the whiteboard, post-it notes, a planner on the desk. It's often the starting point when a company gets rolling. Like they're going for time efficiency, right? How do we schedule this next week? And when I walk into, I've been in multi-million-dollar contractors' offices where they're scheduling the next 3 weeks with somebody writing on a whiteboard, which for kind of a working session is a great thing, but it's really challenging to kind of give yourself the broader overview of all your projects and stuff, and move stuff around and say, well, what if we move this here and here? And also when the cleaners show up at night and they erase a whiteboard, what happened to your schedule? So I think there's some pretty easy entry points, contractor foreman being one of them that I am familiar with, that can give you just easy basic tools to build some schedules that allow you to manage it a little better than those systems and the other system is, well, it's in my head, right? And that
Yeah.
is a challenge, because if it's in your head and you are sick tomorrow or out of the office for vacation, or you have some kind of emergency, how does your crew know what to do the next day? So kind of what I'm getting at there is you're going to want to build, if you don't have it, you're going to want tools in place that allow other people to use them, to see them and access them. It allows some flexibility to move stuff around and see what it does to your schedule overall. And also I feel it's not the most important feature, but it is, I think, very important to be able to document your progress, so you can use that information later to see how long, to get production times for estimating, to be able to resolve delays, to be able to say, hey guys, I finished 2 weeks early. So I'll go into some details on what I think are key for software, regardless of what choice you have.
I'm not as consistent as I should be with construction management software, but one piece of software that I have used in the past and I liked it is Asana.
Okay.
It's really good. It actually connects to your phone, so it gives you daily updates on your open task. You can track what's been closed. You can also create Gantt charts in there for larger projects. It can also connect with your subcontractors and alert them as to what outstanding tasks they have, so everyone will be on the same page.
Yeah, that's a good one. And there's a lot of other tools that are similar. There's way too many project management and construction management tools out there. And I do a lot of research. I work with a lot of contractors that use a variety of them. And I would say there's no perfect one. But there are types of tools that can be more helpful for, service, like the security camera and stuff, where it's short duration, high frequency. There's some field management software that may be a better fit than a larger project management software for, a kitchen remodel that takes 2 or 3 months. I'm up for a quick break here. You guys, let's see, it's 9:08 my time. So time's that over there? 11:08. How about 11? Go ahead, Maddie.
I was gonna say, when you was talking about the whiteboard, it made me think of an app we were using. I was trying to find it on my phone. When I was doing Scrum Master, we was using an app that did the sticky tabs, where you have the sticky tab where you write these dates and sort out your work, like almost like Agile through sticky tabs. It was similar to what you were describing. That's why I was like, tell me the app, because it sounded like something I have done before, but I was trying to find a name. I couldn't find it. Sorry.
No problem. So let's come back at it is 11 over there, right? Chicago area. 9 o'clock, 9:10 here. So let's come back at 11:15. Sound good?
Yep.
All right. We'll see you guys in a few minutes. All right, we back?
Yes, I'm back.
Cool. So hopefully I didn't just throw too much random information there. Any give me some feedback on what we've gone over so far. Questions? Has it been helpful? Am I missing something on kind of before we get into critical path stuff? Just the ins and outs of basics of project scheduling. Anybody want more, want less? I consider silence to say that I'm awesome and you guys love listening to me talk.
You are awesome. But
Well, that's
no, what I was just gonna say that I'm definitely interested in more formalizing it more, the way my process is, for getting things done. I definitely want to look into
Cool.
it myself personally.
Good. So we will get through the critical path stuff here. Kind of an intro to it because it sounds like it's two things. One is it's something that you guys aren't running into much, so you may have not experienced it, and also it may not be something that matters to you too much right now. But I do want to introduce it, so we'll dive into it. But then I do want to get into tools for building your schedules of whatever form it is, and I think that's the area that you're saying you want to work on. So, you guys see a really hard to read screen full of lines and bar charts?
Yeah.
Okay. So this is I can't zoom in too much because I don't know the owner I don't think cares that I'm sharing this, but this is a $3 billion hospital project. And I'm working with a contractor who out of 3 billion has about $1 million worth of work. All right, so this is the baseline project schedule. It's a critical path method schedule. It's built in, I don't know, I'm assuming this looks like Primavera, which is a scheduling software. But just giving you a brief preview because $3 billion project, my clients got about $1 million worth of work, and half of that is engineering. So their actual install is very minimal, and they're not even on this schedule. Right, 63 pages. Has anybody ever run across seeing one of these on a project they're involved in? Does it look intimidating and confusing and not very useful? I think it does. When I open this, I'm trying to find my client. Yeah, Harold says yes. Trying to find my client's work on this because we're actually submitting a proposal for the work, and they say submit your proposal based on fitting into the project schedule. So I look at this, I can't even find the work. Right, so it's like it's a small fish in a big pond on a project like this, and companies that do the work similar to what you guys have described to me doing, you're the small fish on projects like this. So just wanted to give you a visual. So on when you're hopefully bidding that big project one day to get on that big project, and you're only a small scope, and they hand you this. Yes, it's like, what do I do with this? But what we have here is called a Gantt chart, and each one of these lines is an activity. And in this case, they're divided by pre-construction activities, interior work, exterior work. So that's all these green bars are just different phases and stuff. But all this is showing is sequence. So what comes first, what comes second, and so on. It's showing a description of what the work is. It's showing a duration. It's showing dates associated with that. So that this is all plugged into a software that when you say, I start with A, then I go to B, and then I go to C, and A is a day, and B is a day, and C is 2 days, it calculates, okay, if we start on January 1st, 4 days later, I'm on January 5th. That's what the software does. And on a more advanced level, it calculates if there's a path, it's the longest path to get the shortest long path to get something done for an entire project. It says, here's what's called the driving path, the critical path, which is a sequence of things that must be followed to get it done. There's a lot of other activities can float around in there. So it does all the math to figure out which ones can't move around and to understand when that project's going to be done. And also shows what's called float for the things that can move around. So my goal when I do this is to help contractors get to the point where they are looking at the schedule and they're a little intimidated, but they're doing it because they have an opportunity to get to that next level, right? Get into these larger jobs. This Herrera Bolt Webcor is joint venture of 3 contractors that are multi-billion-dollar contractors and all combined. So this is what opportunity looks like, and it doesn't look fun. It looks intimidating, but I want to give you the basics of what this really means. So let me go back to my other screen here. All right, can you see my presentation now? Yes, no? But
Yes.
Okay, cool. So critical path method. How can I make it simple? It is not, it's not an easy thing to make simple. There are people who make careers out of doing this. It originated, I don't want to get this wrong, but it was either like the Manhattan Project, I think it was for developing nuclear weapons, or it was, I do believe that's what it was, but a large military program needed a way to figure out how do we get from start to finish, how long is it going to take, and how do we manage the in-between. So you can be a scheduling professional, you can get paid a lot of money to know how to do this, but it takes a certain kind of mindset to sit behind the computer and just work on these schedules all day long. But if everything goes right, and you guys are chasing these larger projects, you're going to run into it, and you need to know these basics for sure. So PMI is the Project Management Institute, and they define the critical path method. It's the sequence of scheduled activities that determine the duration of the project. So it sounds pretty simple, right? A schedule tells you how long the project is going to take, but it does that by determining the critical path. The critical path is the longest number of days, hours, weeks, months, whatever it's going to take to get the project done. And it's determined by defining a bunch of activities. Activity is the work. It's security cameras. It's the steel erection. It's the pre-construction submittals, it's the engineering. It's the kitchen appliances. It's all those things. Duration, straightforward, is how long it takes to do that activity. Relationship, that's where you get into a little bit more sophistication. So there's activities that require something else to be finished before you can start them. If you're putting wood flooring in, right, you want the floor to be done. You want whatever cabinets are if you're going around the cabinets, you want them done to do the flooring after. If they are cabinets that go on the flooring, you don't want the cabinets there, right? There's start to start means 2 things that you can start together. You can start installing windows and doors together because rough framing is done, waterproofing is done, and so on. Start to finish is a harder one to describe, and I'm going to draw a blank right now for a little bit on how to give you a good example of that, but hopefully I'll come up with one. The relationship that just happened. Go ahead, Maddie.
Now I was going to say, from one of my courses where we had start to finish, you have to be able, it says what it is. It's, I think the finish to start and then a start to finish, right? Don't it go in that order? Where you finish
Yeah,
a project, then start another one, then that's the start to finish. So, you know, they know how to, I don't know, maybe I said
Yeah,
it wrong.
it's hard to describe, and it's not a very common scenario. But it's you have to kind of starting. Wish I had a good example. But it's starting an activity in order to finish the other activity. So it's kind of when there's overlap between stuff. Let's see. Yeah, I don't have a good example, and it's a rare one. Predecessor, so and successor, those are what define relationships. Predecessor comes before, successor comes after. Float or slack, two terms to describe how long an activity or task can move before it changes critical path. So you can have an activity that has, it can happen anytime within 100-day period on a project. But if you start on day 101, that means now you've delayed the project. Milestone, these are the major points in a schedule or a project that measure completion. So the most important one is final completion. Michael, you talked about developing a project into phases. So the end of a phase, the start of the next phase would be a milestone. If you're doing a large building and you're releasing, if you're completing portions of it, all right, so partial occupancy, that's a milestone. If you're doing road construction and you're building a new freeway that's 100 miles long and you open up the first 10 miles, that's a milestone. Baseline schedule, we kind of talked about, that's the initial schedule that everybody agrees upon on. Here's how long the project is going to take. Here's how the sequence is. Here's who's responsible. A recovery schedule comes up when there is a project delay and the owner is going to say, all right, contractor, you're 2 weeks behind. How are you going to catch up? So yeah, contractor's got to prepare a schedule that shows, well, I'm going to work overtime. I'm going to overlap these activities now and I wasn't planning on it. Here's how I plan to recover that time. And it could be the opposite too. The owner can have the delay. The owner can say, you know, my permit was 2 weeks later than I thought. How can you guys help me make that 2 weeks up? Time impact analysis takes, Maddie, I'll get to you in 1 second here. Time impact analysis, when there's a delay, we'll take a snapshot of the work around that delay. And it's used to say, well, the foundation construction was supposed to take from August 1st to September 1st. It's now taken August 1st to October 1st. And it'll do it. You analyze all those activities and whatever delayed it to do the math on to say the project is this many days behind and contractor, it's your fault. Maddie, you had your hand raised?
Yeah, the reason it sounded confusing when I was like, go where these two to go together, where you got to finish to start. I'm sorry to go back because I'm that type of person where I got to solve the problem. I'm sorry. But it's when I said finish to start and then start to finish, meaning if I'm the one that's prepared, say I'm the starting of the project and my end of the project before you pick it up determines your start time. It's like that. So if I start preparing the glue and you the person to put the glue in the container, then the end time for my preparing the glue, the mixing of the ingredients, all that stuff, by the time I get all that done, if I finish at 6 o'clock, your pickup time or when you picked up when it got to you will be your start. You have to base it on the person that's starting before you. Is what's the finish. That's why I said, isn't it finish to start? So you finish, I finish, then you start.
Yeah, that's finish to start. Yeah. Start to finish is a little harder to come up with a good.
No, that's start. No. Start to finish is meaning my finish is to start a new project. But your start will be when you understand when I finish, like if I'm putting in the nails and I'm done putting the nails in the door and you're the door hanger, you have to wait till I finish putting all of the lining of the door in before you hang the door. So
Yes,
that will be considered your start is when my finish of the door
yes,
lining.
correct. Yep. Thank you. So time impact analysis and FragNet is similar to, it's basically you're just taking portions of the critical path schedule and using that to analyze changes or delays. An as-built schedule. So this is, you built the baseline schedule. You said, here's what's supposed to happen. The as-built schedule, similar to as-built drawings that reflect what you built and compared to what the design was. It's when stuff was done. It's the actual duration, actual dates, and actual sequence of work. And where that's going to be important to you as a sub on a job is somebody's going to ask for that information to do critical path updates. They're going to want to say, what day did you start? When did you finish? And do you have any changes to the sequence? Resource loaded or cost loaded. This ties people, equipment, money, and materials to the schedule. So it's similar to what you're doing when you're estimating. If you're talking drywall and you're bidding job, you're saying, I'm going to be there for 2 weeks. I'm going to have 5 guys a day hanging drywall. And then when I start finishing, I'm going to have 7 because I'm going to add 2 to do the tape and mud afterwards, stuff like that. So resource loaded schedules include that information. So here's my attempt at trying to put this in a picture that makes sense to understand what critical path is. Can you guys see this okay? Is it zoomed in enough? I don't know that I can zoom in more here.
We can see.
Cool.
Yeah, it looks pretty good.
All right. So critical path is activities and duration. And it's activities that have to be completed for the project to be done. And it's the longest chain of events that get there. So looking at the top one with the red, right, so the arrows are the sequence. So we're in this example, we're saying our foundation is 10 days and our framing is 15. Once framing is done, we can start on the exterior and we can also start on the electrical. Once the electrical is done, we can go to the plumbing and then we can do the interior finish. But we can't be done with the project till all of that is done. So some quick math here. We have 10 days plus 15, so we're 25 days. The electrical is 2, so we're at 27. Plumbing is 3, so we're at 30. And the interior finish is 35 days. If you just look at foundation plus framing plus exterior, you have 10 plus 15, 25 plus 5, you're at 30 days. So the exterior can be done, if everything goes per schedule, 5 days earlier than the interior. So that's what they call float. So if you're the exterior finish contractor right there, if you show up 2 days late, but you still get done, 2 days later than planned, but you still get done in your 5 days, you're good because you had 5 days of float before you impacted final completion. If you show up 5 days late before you start, now you've become the critical path, right? You've used up that 5 days of available time that the project schedule had. So if you show up 5 days late and you still take 5 days, the project's going to take 40 days. The owner can come after you for a 5-day delay. And contracts can have liquidated damages saying for every day you're late, you owe the owner $100 a day or $1,000 a day or whatever penalty they have described there. And if you've signed a contract for it, you're liable for that. And you're in the position of trying to prove, well, I didn't show up 5 days late. The framing took 20 days. So I couldn't show up. So it's the framing that was the problem. That's kind of the basics of where the critical path is used to get a project done on time, and if it's not done on time, to determine why not. Bottom example there, similar example, it's just showing that with a little bit, this, if you're building your baseline schedule and you have one minor change in from an activity for, say you're doing a draft baseline schedule and that top one was your draft with 5 days for exterior. And then you're talking to your exterior subcontractor because a good GC is going to call and say, hey, come sit in this meeting. And all right, exterior contractor, I got you for 5 days. And they say, well, yeah, but you added, right? You're doing stucco instead of siding. So I've got 3 more operations. It's going to take me 20 days. You're building the baseline schedule. That's great conversation to have right there. So now you have this new updated baseline where the critical path goes through the exterior and it gives the electrical, the plumbing, and the interior have 10 days combined flow. And that change only results from adding 15 days to the exterior activity. So I hope that this is kind of a simple example, and I showed you a 63-page schedule. That 63-page schedule does this, but a computer does it and tells you what that critical path is and can give you a report on what activities have float and so on. Questions on kind of this example, and does that give you a basic of what critical path really is intended to do?
So the different color on the boxes, do they represent something or are they just random colors?
They're random colors that I chose, but they're different. So on the top one, the red is the critical path, and the orange is highlighting that is an activity that has float. And I just didn't want to use the same colors because I thought I was hoping it'd be a little clearer. So on the bottom, the orange is a critical path now, and the green has float.
Okay. So when it says float, so like at the top exterior, it has 5 days and then it has 5 days float. So does that mean it's a total of 10 days before it becomes critical?
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah. So you just gave me an idea on how to make my example even better here a little bit. So the 3 activities in the top, right? 10 plus 15 plus 5 is 30. So there's 30 days to get to the exterior. And that's probably, I think it'd be more clear if I had put that number right there. So, and then you do the math to go through the activities. It's the arrows here are really, the arrows show the critical path when you combine them with the math. So to do this, you will do the math through each path of activities. And then the path that has the highest duration becomes a critical path. And then you can work backwards to see what the float is for the other ones. But you were exactly right that you have basically 10-day window for the exterior before it becomes critical. Because if you add 5 more days, that top path is also 35 days. Any other questions, comments? What's we got? So what do you need to know to build one of those schedules? There's not too many things. It's basic information that you are already doing every day. You just may not know it, and you may not be. You're most likely not putting it in a format that would create a critical path schedule. But if you do need to find you're building one for yourself, say you're getting a project kitchen remodel for the first time where the owner says, "Can you build me a critical path schedule?" What you need to know is the activities that go into it, the sequence that go in, as well as the relationships, finish to start, finish to finish, the duration that you expect them to take, And quantity or volume of work also ties into duration right there. What has to happen before you begin the work? So that is, you have to have a signed contract, you have to have a permit, and all the pre-construction activities. You have to have maybe some submittals and shop drawings accepted, stuff like that. And then if you are participating in a larger schedule for the project, but just building one for your own activities, you need to know if there's concurrent work. Concurrent work means it happens with your stuff, right? So if you are doing communication cabling, is the electrician going to be in there together, right? Because you need to know who's going to be in your way. You need to know how to coordinate rooms that you're working in, stuff like that. That's as basic as it gets, right? And most of the stuff you're likely doing in your head when you're planning tomorrow, right? You're saying, I've got 12 doors to install tomorrow, or I've got 500 square feet of flooring to install. And I know that this other sub's going to be in there, so I need to start in this room while they're in the bedroom, so we're not in the way. And I think I'm going to be done in a day. The critical path method is taking that, putting it into the software. Microsoft Project is a big one. Primavera is a big one. And a lot of the online systems will build you a Gantt chart and do a critical path calculation. That's what the work is that can be automated. You put this stuff together, you put it in a software, and you come out with that 63-page schedule. It's built. Now, there's no point really in building it if you're not going to use it as a tool on the project to track your work and track the project overall. Well, if there's a critical path schedule built, somebody's going to ask you for information to updates. And this is where job diaries become important, where making sure the folks in the field understand what information they need to keep track of, making sure that your project manager understands what information needs to be tracked, as well as make sure they're doing it, and understanding how to convey that information to the person or company that's doing the schedule updates. But typically, what they want to know is, we've got a baseline schedule. You start work. We need to know when you started your activities and when you finished it. These updates are often done on a monthly basis, sometimes weekly. On shorter projects, they may just be done at the end of the project, but monthly is pretty common on larger ones. So every month you're gathering that information, you're submitting it to the owner or to the GC or whoever is responsible for managing the schedule. They're also going to ask how much, if you've started an activity, how much time do you have left? So when you built, looking at our really small example here, if you're the exterior guy and you started and you're running behind, so you're 2 days into your 5, but you still have 5 days left, you need to communicate that so the schedule can be accurate and allow the following activities to be adjusted. So if you're going to take 7 days now, something behind you is going to be delayed, and that needs to be communicated and possibly figure out how to make the time up. But that's why they ask for your forecasted remaining duration. A lot of times you'll also be asked for, when are you going to start your next activities? That can be calculated automatically by the software when stuff is updated ahead of you. But as you get closer to your work, we're talking now, are you going to start Monday versus Tuesday? Not, are you going to start September 1st versus November 1st? They may ask for information for your work. Are you going to do the work differently today than you planned on yesterday? Are you going to start in bedroom A instead of bathroom B? So that can be adjusted in the schedule, because now whoever was in bedroom A needs to know you're going to have that sequence different. And then the last part, and this is usually comes in the form of a report that the prime contractor provides to the owner. It's going to say, here's our current project delays or changes that have modified the schedule. And that is conveyed often in here's what the delays or changes are, here's the impacts to the schedule, here's the potential cost impacts, here's what we're doing to resolve them, or here's the conflict that we do need to resolve with you. That's the 30-second rundown on critical path. You guys want to get into this anymore, or do you have new questions based on what I've gone through?
I have another question. So I'm not familiar with commercial at all. And
Right.
it seems like with commercial, there are penalties for not meeting these timelines for the different subcontractors.
Mhm.
In the private residential space, trying to figure out, like, is there a way for us to like mitigate these delays? You know, what I found is just the inspection process is so unpredictable.
Right.
So how do we plan for that when we are creating these critical path charts? How do we plan for inspections? How do we plan for callbacks with subcontractors? Because sometimes they, you know, they don't play nice together. So
Right.
one subcontractor may do something, another guy comes in, says, "Oh, I can't do my job because he missed XYZ." I know some of that is just project management and quality control check, but how do you mitigate some of those things from a residential standpoint, where I don't think it's common to impose penalties on subcontractors?
Yeah. So you're asking more on the front end, how do you avoid it versus how do you
Yeah, I don't know if
resolve?
this
Yeah.
can be completely avoided, but how can we word it or structure our, you know, our critical path chart to account for those? Like, I know we have the float days, but
Mhm.
account for like permits that may happen in 2 weeks, may happen in a month and a half.
Right.
Like, how?
So the permit is a great example of a milestone, and we talked about milestones. So if you can't start work without the permit in hand, that's the start milestone. So for that, you have to kind of recognize if that's the very first activity and nothing else can start, and it's 2 weeks late, the entire schedule ends up shifting. And you have to, on the front end, kind of figure out responsibility for that. If we are often held, it's at the whim of the agency, right? Of the building department. It's just the reality. There's nothing necessarily that you can do to get a permit sooner. If you, once you've submitted it, you're just kind of stuck with it. So you have to build your baseline and get everybody on board to say, all right, guys, this is if the permit shows up in 2 weeks. But you need to be aware that it's been taking 4 weeks lately. So when it takes 4 weeks and this whole project is shifted 2 weeks, if you're working in a really good business relationship and trying to get subs to play together and everything, it's that conversation of what are we going to do if that shifts to 2 weeks, and getting everybody, at least, you know, it may not be on paper, it may not be in a contract, but it's a conversation saying, you know, your plumbing contractor may say, well, I'm going to have a problem if it shifts 2 weeks because I'm booked up for the next 6 months. That may tell you that you're going to have to find an alternate plumbing contractor. But you know that ahead of time because you've had that conversation, and hopefully it's been a professional conversation with that plumbing contractor saying, okay, I'm going to keep you on the schedule, but I got to be honest, I need a backup plan if you're that swamped. Hopefully everything works out. But if it doesn't, I may need to hire somebody else to do that work. And then he may say, well, hold on, I can make it work. I'll be there and give you that commitment.
Mm-hmm.
So that's kind of the proactive side. You can, from a paperwork aspect, there's nothing in the private world that says that you can't write a subcontract to your subcontractors that holds them to some form of duration and schedule. The challenge to that becomes making sure that schedule works at the beginning for everybody, because if it works for the plumbing guy but not the framing guy, the guys relying on the framing guy, it's no longer his problem, right? If he says I I told you I'd take 3 days and I took 3 and I couldn't start because of the framing. You have to establish for each of those contractors their responsibility. And in public works and commercial, that happens by default, almost by having these schedule requirements built into the contract. That can be built into private residential. Penalties can also be built in depending on what your state contract laws are. And not for, I'm not talking just construction contracting, but contract law in general. Liquidated damages is the most common one, which is basically places of value for each day that the owner doesn't get use out of their facility. If there's an owner that has liquidated damages in the contract, you should roll those down to your subcontractors that are working for you. Because if it's their problem, you're going to want to collect from them. So that's kind of the using the hammer to be proactive. So there's 2 different approaches there, and they often kind of mesh together. But none of them will really work if you don't establish some form of schedule at the beginning that's going to be your baseline. And if you don't have that baseline schedule, no, it's very easy to say, well, you never told me how long I had, or you didn't tell me I had to be there after the plumbing. You told, I figured I was going to come in before the plumbing, right? If I'm the electrical guy. Yeah. And he said, when a plumber didn't show up, I just started. And then he came and he showed up, he got in my way. If you don't have this schedule created and in some form reviewed and agreed upon by everybody, you're losing your ability to be proactive in that management.
Okay.
Does that kind of provide some useful context around it?
Yeah, it does. And one of the bigger issues, and I'm figuring out a way to mitigate it now, is like, for instance, my electrician and the permit part on kitchen and bath, that's easy. That's a day process. Getting a permit is easy. It's scheduling the inspection. So
Okay.
I really like to schedule it like as soon as we start, but sometimes my electrician or my plumber is like, no, let's wait because we don't know the extent or whatever it may be. And then I end up ordering the permit towards the end of that portion. And now the wait period from them completing their job to the inspection can sometimes be a month.
Right.
And we can't close the walls up until we have both of those trays inspected.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's the issue I run into, but I think I'm probably just going to start scheduling them. And if we have to reschedule them when they come up, we'll do that. But
yeah, that's really what these conversations of building these schedules do. It has you ask those questions. So you got to determine and say, all right, I think you're going to be done at the end of the month. I'm going to go ahead and schedule the inspection. If they say, well, I don't know if I'm going to be ready, it's an agreement. We hope that you're ready. We hope that because you're telling me it's going to take 2 weeks. So we're going to plan on 2 weeks. We're going to schedule it then. And if you take 3, or if there's a problem, as soon as we know, we'll follow whatever process there is to reschedule the inspection. But you're recognizing your risk on the front end, because you may already know that if we reschedule, we're going to slip 3 weeks, right? So you have 2 scenarios. Then you have one, all right, we hit the schedule, we're going to be done here. But if we don't, we're going to be done here, using the best available information. And then you can tell the homeowner, right, hey, you got an old building, you never know what you're going to run into. We may need to upgrade a panel that we didn't think of. Maybe there's wiring that is toast that needs to be redone that we don't know about. So we think it's 2 weeks. If anything delays that, it's going to be 3 more weeks. But hey, homeowner, here's what's realistic based on the information we have. And they can say, well, how do we make sure we don't go into 3 weeks? Maybe your electrician says, well, I can bring in another guy to do some advanced work, but you're going to have to pay for it. Homeowner may say, cool, I'll do that, right? So I can be done. So that's all. That's what the planning is, right? It's trying to go through as many of those scenarios and risks and mitigate them or accept them, right? You don't, just because there's a risk doesn't mean you have to do something to eliminate it. It's as much about accepting certain risks, eliminating others, and hoping that you can mitigate whatever you can eliminate.
Understood.
Mo, I wanted to jump back to, you asked for some examples of stuff. Have we kind of touched on those, or am I missing an area of examples that would be useful to you?
Yeah, I think it's been pretty comprehensive. I would say, in terms of commercial, really just holding contractors accountable, to the timelines is where I've had the most struggles.
Mm-hmm.
So, I would like to be able to, especially as, I hope to get into more commercial based work and do these kinds of things. I would love to know ways that I can, I guess, either find the contractors who are able to stick to a schedule like this, or, build up the ones that I have.
Yeah. It's, and that's a challenging, there's no easy answer for that. I've found that subcontractors who willingly participate in building these schedules, and by participate, it may mean is something as simple as it's a phone call. They say, I'm going to take 5 days. You do something basic like we're looking at right here.
Mhm.
Send them a picture and say, does this look good to you? Right. And if they say, well, hold on, if it's going to be on paper, I want 10 days. Maybe they're not the right sub for you, because they're starting to kind of punt at the beginning just because they're nervous about a commitment.
Mhm.
Then yeah, and you cycle through these subs, and eventually you find the ones who say, I know my work, or I'm comfortable establishing the schedule because I'm also comfortable being able to manage it and respond and not get in a battle over a delay or a problem. All right, you want, because they're willing to invest in the schedule because it benefits them. And this is when you talk about building contractors up. If you go through this exercise with them, you also present it as, hey guys, yeah, it's holding you to 5 days, but it's holding me as the GC to all this stuff. And if I delay you, right, you have proof, right? Because we said, here's what it's going to be. If we don't do this exercise and you try and tell me that I delayed you, I'm going to say, prove it. And you can demonstrate to them that this tool's going to help them as much as be, right? It's not a tool for penalizing. It's a tool for avoiding the disagreement in the first place and giving everybody the ability to prove their case, work together professionally, and agree that, yeah, it took 36 days. We all tried our best. Inspector showed up a day late. What are we going to do? All right. I think that's what I use when I try and beef up those subs of willingness to participate in building the schedules. And a lot of this comes down to everybody's busy and nobody wants to come to meet in a room with 12 other people, particularly ones who may not play nice together. Right. If your plumber and your electrician work on the same projects all the time, but they don't like each other, getting them in a room to build a schedule is not the right approach. But individual conversations, and then taking that, combining it, and saying, hey guys, we've talked to both of you. We've talked to everybody. Here's what we see. Let's all sign off on this plan. So that's what it is. It's a plan. It's not a requirement, because plans will change. You get that buy-in, and it really does improve the relationship with the project. But it does drive you into the next step of, all right, now you got to track everybody. Right? Then you got to convince the framer to call you when he shows up, so you know on day one, and to tell you when he's done, so you know on day 15 that he kind of did what he committed to. and everything that I just went over doesn't need to be done in a software or it doesn't have to be a critical path method. A schedule is a schedule, right? They're all the same tool. The critical path just is what's used to really prove. It's what can be used to really prove what the delay was when there is a delay, and and to plan the more complex tasks like material deliveries, or long lead stuff, things like that. All right. What else on critical path? Is that a good intro?
I thought it was a mathematical formula for the critical path, if I
Well,
wasn't mistaken. Huh?
There is, but I think
I was like,
yeah.
I was looking
Well,
at it like, wait,
it's
a little more.
it's not a strictly just a formula.
Yeah.
It's a method. It's a mathematical method, which is I did a very basic.
Yeah, you did. It's
Yeah.
cool though. I
Yeah.
get the gist of it. Just when you get those numbers there, if I had never seen it before, I'm like, well, how did he get that and how did he get that? But
Yeah. Well, I do want to make sure that for my example, do the numbers make sense and how I actually got to 35 days on the top and 45 on the bottom? Are there any questions on that? All right. I think the silence is golden. Because there's an entire, when I went to school for construction management, I took an entire year-long course on scheduling, and most of it's on critical path. It can be a very,
yes,
very intimidating and tactical
yes.
thing. But if you drawing it out, and this, I might, if I were to guess, I'd say it might be why Michael uses Visio sometimes, is it allows a visual like this to kind of, you trace the path and do the math, is what my teacher used to say.
Yeah. I only asked about the math part because I think I confused everybody in the beginning. Like, yeah, you got to add forward and you got to come back. And when you didn't show that, I was like, oh, well, let me step out of that one.
Yeah. Well, that's for a different, that's in a couple of years when we're all on an airport project or something.
I just hope I didn't confuse nobody because I was like, yeah, you got to go forward, then you got to come back. And I'm like, wait, okay.
Yeah,
never mind.
we might touch base on that. I wasn't going to do it quite yet, but it looks like my battery's about to die. So I'm going to do another 5-minute break here. We'll be back in 5 minutes with a charger and we'll get this last hour taken care of. Sound good? I'll be right back.
Sounds good.
All right, I'm back. Everybody good? So we got about 50 minutes left here. Wanted to get into a little bit on, we've talked a lot about what schedules are, why you build them, but everything keeps coming back to a lot of talk on durations and sequence. And so wanted to get into a little bit on that. You guys see my screen okay? Yes, I hope. Cool. So what I consider scheduling is for your crews and equipment, workforce management. If you Google it, they have a whole lot of fancy words that say, here's what workforce management is. But I consider it to be as simple as it's a process to schedule your resources. And your resources are your people, they're your money, they're your equipment, materials, everything that goes into completing the work that you've set your company up to do. So it all comes back to, it's just not right process. Every one of those definitions mentions process at least once. So at a minimum, you've got resources to start with. You got to figure out where they go. You got to figure out when they're needed. I would guess that most of the people that are participating today have some form of this on paper, in their head, or within a software, or combination of both. Yeah, but I wanted to kind of review, I guess, I don't know if more formal is the right way to put it, but just to build some structure around it. So planning and scheduling at a high level are very similar to estimating. And I think your stuff with Kevin has probably kind of covered this, right? It's what do you have to do to build this project or complete the scope? And how much is it, right? Quantify it and define it. Then you can look at what do you need to complete that work. So what kind of workforce, what kind of equipment, materials, what services, engineering, inspection, all those little details. Once you get there, you want to kind of look at, all right, what's resources are most constrained. And by that, I mean, it's either scarce or limited availability. So stuff like cranes, specialized inspections, certified staff, like certified welders. If you're installing a vendor specific product and they've got training required for you to be able to install their product, those are limited people. Money, right, is a constraint. So you want to kind of define what are your most limited and hard to manage resources. You would need to know where everything is coming from, right? So labor pool, do you have enough folks hired already for this project? Are you gonna have to hire more? If you're union, are you gonna maybe call the hall to bring a few more folks on? All right, do you need to hire a subcontractor to complete a specific scope of work? You got to know where all that stuff is coming from. You have to know how fast it's going to be done. Estimate of production. That's units and time, and we'll get into that in a little more detail. You want to know when it needs to be completed by. That can be driven by a requirement for the project, for a schedule, or it can be driven by you need that crew on another job in a week, or maybe there's no real constraint, but it can be driven by budget, right? I bid this thing to be done in 5 days with 2 people. I need it done in 5 days with 2 people. And where's kind of a straightforward one if you work within a local region. But I know we've got some contractors here. They're going from Texas to Illinois. Right? Are you sending people from Texas to Illinois to do work? Are you hiring in Illinois? Are you going to go to a different state? I know, Maddie, you've talked about work across a variety of locations. So it really becomes important if you are working in broader regions. So that's what goes into building, to doing workforce and resource planning. What you get out of it is a plan that makes sense to you and to your team and to whoever you're communicating with it. An order of work that can be used to input into larger schedules for projects. It identifies the resources you plan on using, what you need, gives you an idea of where they're going to be. You hopefully have thought about external factors, right? We talked about the permitting, we talked about the inspection, lane closures, other subcontractors, long lead materials, and it's giving you some baseline targets for your what you need and expect for your production and for your budget for financial forecasting. So you've got a bunch of information, but you've got to do some math to get to a useful point with a lot of it. And hopefully this aligns with what you guys have reviewed with Kevin on estimating. But if you're building a schedule, you need to know how fast you're going to complete work. I need to know production rate. So if you have 1,000 square feet of carpet to put in, how long does that take? Because if you know that 1,000 square feet takes 4 hours and you have a project that has 10 times that, you got 40 hours of labor. Once you establish that, and dive in here if somebody has questions on this. I've tried to keep it to the way I keep my schedule simple, I guess, is what I've tried to do. Plan duration, you've established your production rate. You know the quantity for the project. You can do quantity divided by production rate. It's going to tell you how many days you're going to put in your schedule. You need to define how many people you need, or also equipment, right? Some equipment that's outputting material has production rates associated with it, stuff like that. So you know how much there is. You need to establish production per person or per resource. So how many nails can a framer drive in a day? How many outlets can an electrician get roughed in a day? How many girders can my steel erection crew set? So that's what you use to establish how many people you need to schedule on the job. And a lot of times when you're providing information to a scheduler or to your resource folks, it's often the term man days comes up. So I just wanted to include that calculation. Man days or woman days, I should be agnostic there. It's how many days you're going to work and how many people are on that crew. So all those are very similar to what you use for estimating cost, right? But now you're using it to estimate schedule. Questions or thoughts on there? Does this sound familiar to what you guys do on a regular basis when you're trying to schedule your job? Vicky, I'm going to pick on you. How do you know how to schedule? How do you decide how many people to text to send to a job for tomorrow?
It kind of depends on the size of the job and it's specifically how fast they want it done. So
Okay.
It depends on the client specifically. But usually projects last about a week, but depends if it's bigger, it might last longer. If it's a job that has a certain time frame that needs to be done because of specific conditions, then we can do it in a lot sooner if we increase manpower.
I'm glad I asked you because you brought up something I don't really have covered, and that's working backwards, right? If you have a time frame, you don't have a planned duration, you have an expected duration. So you have to do that staffing calculation backwards and figure out how many, based on what your crew can do in a day, you have to figure out how many crew members you need. So scheduling and planning here isn't always a forward calculation. A lot of times it can be a backward calculation, especially as you get towards the end. If you got an activity that has been going slower than planned or something, you're getting towards the end, you start looking at it, all right, how trying to speed this up, what do I need to do to do so? Regardless of which way you're doing those calculations, you have to include, and this comes back to bite a lot of people because they don't really consider it, you have to include your non-productive time. Right? So yeah, a crew may be on site for 8.5 hours, half hour, that's lunch. Do they have breaks? Is there a toolbox safety meeting in the morning that takes 20 minutes? Are they, if you're working in a large building, are they unloading their tools a 10-minute walk from where they're working? And are they carrying them back 10 minutes the other way? And you got to plan for all that. So because it adds up, especially in longer jobs, right? 10 minutes a day doesn't take much to build up to an hour of lost production. It happens in a week. So you want to include non-productive time. You got to take into account if you're looking at long durations, you got holidays, you have company downtime for safety meetings, you have stuff like that to figure into your scheduling. If you're going into work you've never done before, it's harder because you don't know your productions because you haven't done it. You don't know necessarily well, I mean, that's really what it is. You don't know your production. So how do you figure it out? A lot of scheduling for new stuff, as well as estimating, as you well know, is just taking a guess, right? It's getting the best information you have to try and figure those durations out off of similar work or other available historical information. So getting into that a little bit, how do you figure out your production rates? If you are new to the business and unfamiliar with it, you're starting from scratch, it can be tough. If you are coming into a business from doing the work, if you've been working for a company for years and you've been running crews or you've seen production, you have some historical information, it's a little bit easier. But somehow, in both those cases, you have to really figure out, okay, how fast am I going to do my work? And has Kevin kind of worked with you guys on some good tools to do that for estimating? Is there anything you guys picked up in there that you think would be helpful for scheduling discussion?
Yes, he discussed using Bluebeam.
Okay.
That kind of was the software that he seems like he preferred in terms of for his estimating and takeoff.
Okay. How about, did he give, and maybe you guys didn't cover this topic, so that's fine too, because I know he's covered a lot of stuff about determining what production rates to use when you're estimating.
I don't think we determined production rates yet.
Okay. All right. So I'll spend a little more time on that then. Does everybody understand what I'm saying with a production rate? It's it's how fast are you going to do a certain amount of work with the resources you're planning to do it with.
Yes, I understand.
Yeah. So if you've been in business forever, hopefully you have historical data, right? So if you're tracking your work daily, this is where software that allows you to track both quantity as well as dates is useful, right? You're tracking, this crew does 8 cameras a day with 1,000 feet of cabling every day. That is information that is useful to you for both estimating jobs as well as building schedules. When you've bid a job well, you already have this information because you made those assumptions already. So for scheduling, a good starting point is you take your estimate and say, all right, well, I already did all the work and the math to say it's going to take me 12 days to do this job with 3 guys. That's your production rate. So now you can schedule the job for 12 days with 3 guys unless something has changed or you want to try and improve on that. If you're starting from scratch, you haven't done the work, but you have hired people who have, right? You have experienced employees, ask them, hey guys, how long does it take to install 12 lights in the living room, right? How many recess cans can you install in a day? If you're going into something that, like dirt work or paving, stuff that requires equipment to make a material, gutters, right? A gutter machine can form so many feet of gutters in a day. Call your manufacturer. If this is information that these examples are scenarios where you're trying to gather information that you may not have because the work's new or you're a new company, or you just want to verify your information. The manufacturers can tell you that we think an excavator can load this much dirt in a day in these conditions. Or a concrete mixer can mix 12 bags in an hour. So that's another resource that can be used to grab that information. They're publicly available that often require you to subscribe. There's cost associated with it, but there are industry databases. RS Means is probably the most well-known one that uses some kind of secret sauce that I still haven't figured out, but they gather information from work everywhere to establish unit costs as well as production rates for so many different kinds of work. It's kind of unbelievable how much it's available. If you're bidding a project and scheduling a project that you have no guess on, sometimes that's the best tool that is available. It can be a somewhat dangerous tool because it's based on a lot of assumed factors and its averages. But sometimes you have nothing better than that, right? It's better than pretending to throw a dart at an invisible dartboard and say, I can do 12 of these in a day. And then last one I have here is you're making assumptions based on what you know from the past. And so it can be a little bit different type of work, but you can, if you're doing a lot of excavation for a basement and you know that my excavator bucket takes 3 scoops to fill up 1 truck, and I'm watching him work on a job right now, it's taking 30 seconds per bucket. So that's 1.5 minutes to load it. And then I know, he's going to go dump it a quarter mile down the road. By the time he drives down there and dumps, I think it's going to take 10 minutes. All this stuff, everything you're doing here is to try and figure out how much you can do per an amount of time in order for you to get it on a schedule.
I have a question.
Yep.
So when we're looking at production rates,
Mhm.
would this pertain more to the subcontractor, and creating the baseline schedule would be the general contractor who has received this information from the subcontractors, because they'll know production rates specific to their particular trade.
Yeah.
As opposed to a general having to figure out production rates for 10 to 15 different trades.
Right. Yeah, that's a great question, and you're correct. There's 2 different applications for this. One is for the GC who's trying to build a schedule. 2 is if he's going to get that, if he needs that information, he's going to get it from a sub. The sub needs to do this. So one way or another, somebody is doing some math to try and say, it takes me this long to do this type of work. And that's what your schedule is being built off of as far as durations.
Right.
There's some risk if you are GC or if you're building a schedule and you're just calling a sub saying how many feet of conduit can you hang in a day, and he says 500, and you have just 1,000 feet of conduit, so you say, all right, 2 days. If you just ask only that question, you give him 2 days, he might say, but I got to move in a bunch of equipment the day before, right? So I'm there for 3 days. So you don't want to just ask from that view. But if he says it's going to take me 3 days, you also do want to say, cool, how many feet a day are you going to do? Because I want to bring in the guy behind you, right? So how far ahead do I need you to be and able to enable me to bring in the follow-up sub without catching up to you? Make sense?
Yep.
Cool. Other questions on kind of this is kind of the foundation for building your planning. Another area where this becomes critical is if you're reliant on materials to do your work. You've got to make sure with your supplier, right? If you can hang 5,000 feet of conduit a day, what do you need to do for your supplier to make sure you have that much on site? You're doing stuff with constrained resources like asphalt or concrete plants, steel production like fabrication shops. Fabrication shop says I can get 1 truckload out per day, but you can install 3 a day. You're not going to start on day 1, right? You're going to start on day 3, because you need those 3 trucks. do I got here? So this is just some examples. We already looked at a critical path. This is a much smaller version of that. This was for a roadway construction site, and this is just one portion of it. It's basically to dig a drainage ditch. Just an example for you guys to see a CPM format. You can see we've got the original duration. So this work is all done. So the column original duration is what it was figured at. Remaining, I'm sorry, this work is not done. Original duration is what it's figured at. Remaining duration is based on the update of what is either calculated or what somebody decides is the remaining duration. You're doing in these dates, early start, early finish. When you're talking CPM stuff, we talked about float, we talked about sequence and everything. Early start would be the first day that that activity can start based on what needs to be done before. An early finish would be the first day that it's finished based on the original baseline duration. It's not really a whole lot more, I think, to get into without going way into the weeds on CPM right there. Other schedule formats at the top is Excel. Super basic, but very clear, commonly used, relatively easy to use to build a schedule. This is a 3-week schedule, which I find common to be in longer term jobs. You'll build a baseline schedule that covers the whole thing. And the owner will say, every week, can you send me an update that shows the next 7 days or the next 15 days or the next 21 days? That really gives you an opportunity to sit down and look at those inspections, right? Look at material deliveries, potential problems, deal, if you've got weather forecast with rain, you can't work, you can plug that stuff in. This is kind of your near-term plan. I find this to be a super useful tool for regardless of what an owner or a GC wants. A 2 or 3 week schedule that you sit down with the people responsible for your projects, whether it's project manager, field superintendent, just yourself. Look at all your projects, do a down and dirty quick schedule here, and then try it, and then have a way to summarize your total resources. Right? If you got 12 projects, you need 25 laborers, but you only have 3 available. Putting all those schedules together shows you that you have a resource problem. And the bottom, that's from monday.com, which is an online project management software, just showing you another example. It works very similar. The concept between all of these is the same, right? You have dates and durations in sequence. So just 3 different versions of how to plan your work. So we started back with, all right, this basic 3-part process. This does work, works well for a little while until everything blows up and you have problems, right? Not enough people, you show up, they're not ready for you to set steel. Drywall's not done, you can't paint it, stuff like that. Or, hey guys, project's behind, I know it's not your fault, but we need to scramble to catch up on time. So that linear scheduling process doesn't work once you get into these disasters. So as you guys are building your scheduling tools, you've talked about trying to find the right software a little bit. You've recognized that you do need, as you grow and as things get busier, you need to really have a handle on all your resources and all your schedules. I really try and guide towards more of a circular flow, right? Which it really revolves around, you got to understand what the work at hand is. That's the work you got to do tomorrow, work you got to do in 3 weeks, work you got to do in a year if you have backlog for a year, the work you want to do in a year if you don't have backlog. You have all these bits and pieces related to getting that work done, but if you don't know what the work is, how are you going to plan for it? You can't know who you need to hire. You can't know what kind of equipment you need to buy. You can't know what kind of cash flow you hope to get, or cash flow is going to be going out the door if you don't really understand your backlog. And you use all these little bits around it to really manage the work and meet your needs now that you know what it is. And that we've kind of talked about, it's the right place. So it's right people, the right place, the right time. What I add to that is you need to know the right information about it, and you need to know how it's actually performing. You need the feedback. I found this representation over the years I've found really helps me wrap my head around the broader picture of how do I turn my organization from responsive and reactive to proactive, and having flexible plans, the ability to respond, the ability to transition and to grow, and see an opportunity and look at my resources and say, you know what, these guys have the skill set right now to go into this whole new market. I know it because I've been tracking what we can do. I know how we can produce. I know what rate we produce at. So to get there, you've got to have a conversation with yourself and your company, right? You got to understand what your work is. Why are you doing it? How much is there? What are the risk factors related to the projects you have? What are the risk factors related to your industry? Right? If you do new construction, what are the market trends on home building? Are they going up or are they going down? If you do commercial, right, out in California, there's more empty commercial space than anybody can even imagine. So you know that you need to be prepared for a market transition, because that work's going to start drying up. When you're looking at getting the work done and your performance, what's driving your success and your failure for your schedules? Do you not have enough people? Do you have the wrong people? Are you actually scheduling? If you're scheduling not aggressive enough because you have great people in place and you're beating everything that you plan on. So as you grow, as you do your business planning, as you do your daily work planning, your longer term work planning, there's not one set of things that you discuss, but you need to be asking yourself and your company a variety of questions related to it. Once you understand what that work is, you get into the resource part, right? What kind of skills do you need? Do you need skilled labor that can do specific trade that you don't have in place? Can you retrain existing labor? Right? Again, it's all conversation and understanding and being open about recognizing where you fail, being happy about recognizing where you succeed, and understanding what drives the major drivers for those successes and failures, money being one of them, right? So money is, it's our primary resource, right? Money in and money out. That's how we do business. It's how we're profitable. I'm sure as executives and owners and leaders in your company, you lose sleep over it. So you have to factor those constrained resources into your conversation about your work planning. And hopefully as you grow, you have to start considering, all right, I need to hire, either bring up or hire some new leaders. I need to manage these field guys. I need somebody to take this conversation about growth and scheduling and resources off my plate so I can go expand the business and manage stuff elsewhere. Right place. Often this is a pretty easy one. It's just where the work is. But if you were looking at expanding regions, if you're working across regions, you have to analyze your work load by where it is. You have to understand what it's going to take to resource in that. You have added cost if you're far away. You have different weather. If you're used to working in Texas on the coast and you got hurricanes, and now you go up into Montana and you got 6 feet of snow, right? How do you plan for that? The planning is all about taking the time and effort to sit down and do what you're doing right here. and to just expand and learn and be willing to sit down and analyze, reach out to people to learn, call your contractor buddy who just moved to Montana and say, hey man, I want to come up there too. What are we up against? Right time, this is kind of reducing from the long term to the, well, not entirely. If you have a long-term backlog of work, which is a good goal for everybody, right? We want to know where we're headed over the next 6 months or a year. Now you start trying to pick and choose what projects are going to fit in, where you can commit larger crews or the more skilled crews or the specialized crews, where you look at the permitting, right? So you're planning projects in one city that permitting takes 4 months. The city next door takes 2. You factor that into your scheduling, so your crews just roll from the 2-month permit lead time to the 4-month permit lead time as they wrap up work. So we've gone, right, that's place, time, and resources. This is where a lot of people either aren't there yet or the ball gets dropped, and a lot of it's just because everybody's busy. But you have to track your performance, and that can be intimidating to develop a system because it seems like it's creating work, right? You're asking your field folks to potentially do more paperwork. You're asking them to pay attention to new things. You're asking yourself to have the bandwidth to take that information and use it. So the conversation you want to have for your company is what's critical to me to know how well we're doing and what's going to give me a benefit by knowing it. Safety is always going to be there because that's an extremely important part, right? We want our folks to be safe. We want to go home every day with no injuries to us or the public or any of that. And quality is going to matter as well, because if you don't do quality work, you're either redoing it or you're not going to get called back. So those two are kind of always there. But kind of a chime in, who does cost tracking? Who tracks how much they spend on a project versus how they bid it? Anybody? Harold, can you give us a little information on what level of detail you actually tell me how you came to do the tracking that you do?
I guess how I came to do the tracking, just in jobs, usually once you're in the job, you kind of see where you're at. And for me, that was just not a good way, because, it really hurt me in terms of organizing the job, understanding the next steps, understanding how to increase efficiency in the job, and knowing where the blind spots and the leaks were. So I just use basic Excel sheet on all of my jobs. I have them on tabs, and every single dollar we spend, I'll have a category for it. So whether it's labor, materials, whether it's any type of management fees, I track all of that in the Excel sheet per project. And
that's great.
Yeah, so whenever, like, if my contractors go to Home Depot, it's pretty good for me. Like when they go to Home Depot, they go to the Pro Desk. I'll get a receipt sent to my email with the property on it. So not only do I track it in my Excel sheets, I'll have that receipt there as well. And I just created my charts where if I wanted to take a quick glance at where I'm at the bottom line, it'll show how much I've collected, how much I've paid in the project. And then I have a box that it's programmed to go red, yellow, or green. So red means I'm behind in the project, yellow means I'm at 0, and green means I'm still ahead in the project. So every day when I go through my projects, the first thing I look at, what color is my box? And that's going to tell me where we're at with things. So it's just a basic Excel that I've just put some formulas in to track every single thing in the job. The only thing I'm not tracking now is, and I'll do it at the end of the project, but it's like a lot of projects I have that are downtown, I don't track like parking. And I still don't track my mileage, which is something I'm still trying to work towards. But those are the two things I'm not tracking.
Does any of that information help you kind of when you're looking at your scheduling of projects? Do they ever tie together, the cost and the schedule?
Yes. So what I do in the draw schedule that I create for the client, I put that in my cost tracking sheet as well. And I charge by milestone. So as we
Okay.
hit the milestone, when I look at my cost sheet, I'll know, plumbing's done, and I'll have that item, and I'll know exactly how much. Sometimes you have to tap the client on the shoulder and say, hey, we're at plumbing. We're at plumbing completion or whatever. So yeah, I put all the draws, I actually named them out by the milestone. And as I put their payment in, it just deducts their total amount. And then I create a separate line for change orders. And I put I track all the change orders that we do in the job. But yeah, that's how I organize my it helps me, like, two recent jobs I had some labor issues. So I had to bring in some other guys, and just by tracking my costs, I knew, unfortunately, I had to fire the other crew I brought in because they were moving too slow and it was costing too much money, but I could see that real time. So I was able to give them, a few days heads up, say, hey, if we don't change this, I cannot keep you on because your productivity is too slow.
Well, that's a great example for what I'm trying to highlight right here. Right? So you've tracked information, but you've also have taken that feedback and you've made decisions off of it.
Oh yeah, all the time.
And most of us, we do that in our head every day. And a lot of times you'll say, well, information in my head is good enough. But when you look at roadblocks to growth, there's only so much that can go in one person's head. And you want more room in your head, right? So you can do other things. So there's cost and time, I'm sure you put into developing that system.
Yeah, and it's
paid off.
Yes, and it's small things that are like slippage things where we may have more trash outs than I accounted for, and they may be $200-300 per trash out, but I may have counted for 3 trash outs, but in reality we ended up with 5 trash outs. So I'm tracking that in terms of how many times we have to trash out this project. So next project similar to this, I need to account for an extra 2 trash outs. Something, it may seem simple, but those small things, they really add up. Or, how much drywall did we use in there and how much waste did we have with this drywall, based on square footage, and make sure that, we're getting more accurate with our drywall or with our tape or with our mud or nails or things like that. So really try to be as accurate as possible on it.
Great stuff. Anybody else out there have kind of similar systems for scheduler costs that have found benefited them to improve their planning and their estimating and their commitments? Well, you had mentioned using Contractor Foreman. Do you use it for anything like this?
I'm sorry, say that again.
You had mentioned that you use Contractor Foreman, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you use it, or do you have plans to use it kind of to develop tools that really give you that information and help you make these decisions?
Right now I just use Google Docs for that.
Okay.
I'm still I don't use Contractor Foreman for everything in terms of my business. I just use it primarily for like estimating change orders, and just daily notes.
Cool. Anybody else have feedback or questions or thoughts on the scheduling conversation and what I just talked about is kind of was already touched on. It applies that system applies to more than just scheduling, right? It's everything. It's financials, it's quality, it gives you feedback for estimating and stuff. And I guess we're kind of wrapping up here, so I'm open to question and answer session. Or is there anything we've missed that anybody would like to get in more detail?
No, I'm basically just taking it all in. Taking notes. I'm gonna definitely do my homework on how I can integrate some of this stuff into what I do, because it's very looks like it'll be beneficial to me.
Yeah. Okay. Maybe I'll spend a few minutes. I don't think I have anything really that's going to show us visual, but just talk. This is. It's not necessarily, I guess software might be the right term, but tool selection or software selection on how do you pick something to do this stuff. And maybe I'll put together, I do somewhere I have a little checklist that I've used with some of my clients to evaluate, but I think what it comes down to is it's not necessarily about finding a scheduling software or a cost tracking software, like the individual bits and pieces. You need to sit down and evaluate what are the needs for you and your company, both now and where you see yourself going, to be able to have these company conversations and tracking and feedback loop. How do you have this? And at the base, what I found to be kind of core base requirements for most contractors is you have to have a solid estimating tool. You have to have a way to translate that into a project budget, which in those two combined are going to help you translate into a project schedule. And then you need a system to actually track your progress. And there's no perfect system for anybody. There's a lot of software out there. Excel's super versatile. Google Sheets is super versatile. Asana, there's a huge variety of them. Sometimes it does take more than one tool. But if you hit those basics of a solid estimate, solid budgeting, and that's kind of a similar thing, but there is a translation from project estimate to a budget tool that can be used for tracking cash flow over time and stuff like that. Scheduling software, but then what's super key to all of it and to give you reliable information is a way to gather your information on your progress. People do handwritten daily diaries. They are a tool that works. They do require some work to both complete them and gather the information to make it useful. So I do recommend finding the mobile-based tool that works for you guys, for your company, your setup. And there's a big variety of them, but it's a field diary that ties to your budget for the project and allows your field folks to say, today I did 4 rooms with 12 sheets of drywall. I used 2 buckets of mud and 500 feet of tape. That does it in a way that is efficient for them to fill it out and gives you an easy way to take that data and not spend hours processing it into something useful. Right? So there's such thing as too much detail. And it's easy to go down that rabbit hole because detail takes time. As you go through the efforts to develop your tools and select them and implement them, part of that process really needs to be an evaluate pretty frequently at the beginning, like, is this doing me any good? And if it's not, don't be shy about changing your investment and your time and your dollars to something that is going to actually be beneficial to you. Don't get too excited about the software is going to do everything for me. Don't get so excited about the long-term potential when you got to kind of start in the basic steps to get the super important stuff done, and then go from there and start. Once you get the low-hanging fruit for your scheduling and your cost tracking and your financial performance, your budgeting, and they all tie together, right? It's all time and resources and materials and and their use over time. Once you get those basics, then you get into the, all right, drywall waste. How do we minimize that? Or do we even know if we're wasting drywall? It's gonna, those systems always evolve, especially as you grow. And we don't have, actually maybe I don't remember if this program has a session for kind of selecting that stuff. But I will try and focus on that a little bit, and I'm happy to answer questions. And I love examples that's been unsuccessful and successful with participants, because that's some of the best knowledge we can have is people who have actually used it. So we'll head on into that in a little more detail as we go through some of this other stuff. I think we got 5 minutes left. Any feedback or questions or desires? Stuff you want to learn more of later? Three hours is a long time, isn't it? But I hope that what we've covered, it does give you a good baseline for scheduling right here, and how it's a tool that's useful to you, not a tool that should be seen as a burden.
How do we go
And-
back and look at the recording of this if I wanted to go back and refer to a certain section?
So the recording will go to Suzanne, and I don't remember for sure if it's on the website for access all the time, or if she will share access for you guys. So I will double check with her
Sure.
and make sure it's available. But I have been recording, at least it says it's been recording. So when I have it, no matter what, I have it and I can make it available to you. But I know Suzanne has a repository that is intended to be always available.
Okay. Really informative. I took a lot of notes and I appreciate it.
Yeah, I appreciate you guys coming out on a Saturday as well. Everybody's got a good weekend ahead of them, I hope. And for next time that you're with me, if you have, well, just because we're going to start a new topic doesn't mean that we can't touch base on any questions that you come up with after the fact here.
Okay, it's good to know.
All right. Then we'll give you guys a few minutes back. Did everybody acknowledge that they were here in the chat, so I can make sure we have an attendance list? I do think everybody's there. So cool. All right, we'll see you guys on the next one. Have a good Saturday.